So to get that perfect barbecue, you use wood. Are you sure it's safe? Whatever. We put the lighter fluid on, strike the match, and oh! Should we call the fire department? That might be a good idea.
All right, good evening. Good evening. Hello. Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to a live, local, late-breaking Barbecue Central show. We should be, again, I think I might have been putting out too much. Well, sounds weird all in itself. We should be streaming live on Outdoor Cooking Channel here on the audio side, Barbecue Central Radio Networks, all that good stuff. And what we're talking about this afternoon, by the way, this is a Saturday afternoon, 2:45 Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to be talking about labeling. Maybe you saw my Facebook post and some Twitter posts about how I believe the beef and the pork boards and councils are trying to sexy up the labeling and how this is supposed to not be confusing to people and all of that stuff. I figured, why not have a guest that knows all about this industry of ours? He's a regular contributor to the show monthly, I might add. Owner of AmazingRibs.com, Meathhead Goldwyn, joining us here on the show. Meathead, how are you, buddy?
I'm great, Greg. It's good to be back with you in daylight this time.
Yeah, it's almost like we're for some reason, some people might think we're like vampires because all we do is we talk about stuff during the night and the evening, but that's when a lot of people can actually talk barbecue or listen to us talk about barbecue and grilling.
I've never talked to you when I don't have a glass of wine in my hand.
It could go spectacularly well or completely awful. I guess only time will tell. So now here's what we want to talk about this afternoon, because I think it was 2 days ago on the 4th, I saw a letter that was linked from CNBC. I have it right here in my hand. I made a post about it, and basically, to summarize this particular article, it was saying that barbecue fans, brace yourself, pork butt will soon be a thing of the past. And then it goes on to talk about the pork board and the beef checkoff programs, and basically, in a nutshell, a possible relabeling of pork and beef meat as we know it. What is correct? What is valid? Is this going to be setting up as really screwing with the consumer now? What do you know about it?
Well, it is not possible. It is definite.
Definite.
Definite. The Beef Checkoff Program and the National Pork Board have colluded to create some new names for meat labels. There's a standardized meat labeling system. When the butcher puts a slab of meat on the scale, it weighs it, there's a scan, and then the label prints out, and there's a standardized name that sounds like something out of Army K rations. Shoulder pork, bone in, and it's very technical, and it tends to be anatomical. And they felt it was intimidating and that they wanted to make it simpler. They also felt that they wanted to sexy up the names. So they got USDA to sign off on a proposal that they created, and they touted that they had done changed the names of 350 pieces of meat. Well, not to panic. These are really minor changes. They have significantly made the label easier to read, and we can talk about that in a minute. But they have made some changes. For example, pork butt, which has always been confusing to everybody except barbecue people.
Correct.
Because the butt, everybody thinks, is the back end of the hog, which we know is the ham. So that confuses a lot of people. It's really the shoulder. It is now, and pork butt, we call it, it's also called Boston butt. They have officially renamed it Boston roast. Well, I presume as a roast, they think they can charge a few pennies more. And in fact, that appears to be what's at the core of this. They're going to make it easier on us, but they're also getting an opportunity to jack up the prices. For example, pork chops. Well, pork chops are cut from the loin. That's that big, long, tubular muscle that runs along the spine,
right,
one on either side, not to be confused with the tenderloin. The loin is where we get boneless pork chops, we get rib chops, and further back down, there's sort of like a T-bone chop. But in the grocery store, they're just generally called pork chops, or they have some sort of anatomical name, that can be confusing. Well, now they're going to be called by the same names as beef cuts.
Yeah.
So now we're going to have pork ribeye chops, beef ribeye steaks. And then we'll have Tbone chops and Porterhouse chops.
Correct.
So they're, pork used to compete with the other white meat. They used to compete with chicken. Well, I think now they're trying to run with the bulls. They're using beef names, which I think will enable them. A ribeye chop sounds a lot better than a pork chop. So whether they're going to try to jack up the prices in time for barbecue season, I don't know. But I certainly think they've sexied it up. They've changed a lot of the names. Well, I shouldn't say a lot. There's about 15 or 20 significant name changes. Now there's a Merlot steak. I think we should adapt quickly. The nice part of this is the labels have been clarified a little. There's 3 lines on the label. I usually send you images. I didn't think to because we were in such a rush. But there is is there a way I can send you an image over Skype that you can display in this conversation? Great.
Well,
there is a way to send images.
If you there should be a thing that says send me a file, and I should be able to just put that up on the screen, I guess. But so while you're
let's give it a try.
While you're trying to do that, in this article, it does say that the pork and the beef industries are retooling more than 350 names of meat cuts to give them more sizzle and consumer appeal. You had mentioned that the pork chop is going to be gone. It's going to be now mentioned as a porterhouse chop or a ribeye chop or a New York chop to compete with its beef counterpart. And the other part of this article said that this marketing move comes at a challenging time for the nation's livestock sector, which has wrestled with historic high grain prices and devastating droughts. And there was some point in this article also that made reference to the fact that commercial freezers have hit an all-time record high for the month of February. And I'm guessing that's stockpile of frozen meat. So to me, and I'm no conspiracy theorist per se, but it almost seems like they're starting to stockpile so much they need to move it out, and it's more of a marketing thing than anything else. They do make reference that people are going to the meat counter, or they have all of these years. I've never heard this bitched about by anybody, that the names of the beef or the names of the pork are way too confusing. And they say people are going to the counter, they're picking up the labels and reading them. Now they have become confused, and instead of picking up a piece of beef or pork, they don't pick up anything, and they turn tail, and they have nothing in their carts. I think that's complete bullshit. I've never seen anybody who wants a piece of beef or pork become confused by a label and then turn tail and not buy something that they went there to get in the first place.
No, I think it clearly is primarily a marketing and PR move. And they've just packaged it as consumerism. And there is some benefit to consumer. I did just send you a file that shows you what some of the new labels will look like. I don't know if it'll be displayable, but for people watching us, they can see it. But it's a 3-line label. And what's really interesting, I show you 2 labels. Did you receive it, Greg?
I'm just getting it right now. Showing folder, desktop.
Well, the top line of one label says Porterhouse chop. The top line of the other label says Porterhouse steak. Notice that there's no pork or beef on the top line. The species has been relegated to the second line. So it says Porterhouse chop, Porterhouse steak. Now, one would think this is an indicator that the chops are all pork and the steaks are all beef, but no, there are some pork steaks.
All right, so I have it up right here. On the left-hand side,
cool.
Porterhouse chop, pork loin, bone in, grill for best results. On the right-hand side, Porterhouse steak, beef, loin, bone in, grill for best results.
So this is what the new labels will look like. Not a huge difference, but it is better than some of the more complex labels that we used to have. Let's see, I can get. I have I think exclusively the complete list of all of them posted to my website. If anybody just goes to AmazingRibs.com, right on the home page, there's a link that takes you to an article about all this. And on that page, there's a link that takes you to all. They say 350 name changes. You got that in the press release?
Yeah.
All the press release? It's 318. They can't count.
It still seems like an awful lot of name changes.
Here's the change. For example, beef brisket edge cut boneless is now brisket edge on the top line. And then on the second line, beef boneless. That's the big change. From beef brisket edge cut boneless to brisket edge on one line to beef bone. So brisket flat is, beef brisket flat cut boneless is now brisket flat on one line, beef boneless on the second line. It's a little less complicated, a little less military sounding, but they have done some stuff like beef chuck neck pot roast bone in is the current name. It is now chuck neck roast. Chuck neck roast. There is no more pot on any labels. Pot roast has disappeared from all the labels.
Is this some type of a conspiracy against weed?
that was one of the questions I asked. And there's no Chateaubriand on any of these labels. And there's no filet mignon, so I think they're anti-French.
Who isn't?
The word mock tender has disappeared. It's now chuck tender roast. So they've cleaned up some of the downscale names. Pot roast is downscale, so it's now a neck roast.
Pot roast has been around for 75 years. When you hear pot roast, you think of grandma and great-grandma and long hours of the oven cooking and braising. I mean, it's not like that name made you think of the dregs of beef. It's comforting. That's comfort food. Pot roast makes you feel good in your heart.
Well, now these new labels are not mandatory. They're voluntary. But I wouldn't be surprised if they became quite standardized. And I wouldn't. I've heard that they're already being pressed into service now.
Do you think that it's going to lend? Do you think it will lend to sales as the quote unquote grilling season comes upon us, which is traditionally Memorial Day weekend?
Well, I certainly think ribeye chop is going to attract people's outreached hands in the meat counter more than just pork chop. So I think that will, attract some sales. People will say, hey, I haven't been buying pork chops, but here's a ribeye. I'm going to get that for a change. So that may help. Some of the other names, I said already that the pork butt is gone. It is now Boston roast. I do have, as I say, the complete list, and I've gone through it, and I've kind of highlighted some of the more interesting ones. One of the interesting ones is Porterhouse and Tbone. Okay, Greg, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second, and don't be embarrassed if you struggle with
That's
this.
fine.
What is the difference between a Porterhouse and a Tbone?
The Porterhouse steak is actually taken, I believe it's farther in. It's from the same strip of beef, but I think you can only get like X amount of Porterhouse steaks off of this. Is it the strip loin or whatever you call it? And then anything, I guess, before that is a Tbone. They're similar in look, but I believe the Porterhouse is going to be bigger overall in weight than the Tbone. But you still have the strip on one side and the tenderloin on the other. But I believe
close.
that's what the difference is.
They're both T-bones. They both have a T-bone. The top of the bone is off the back. And on the one side is the loin muscle. On the other side is the tenderloin muscle. And if you've ever really paid attention when you eat either a T-bone or a Porterhouse, you can taste and feel the tenderloin muscle is more tender and softer.
Yeah.
And the loin muscle, which is also the strip, is on the other side. So you have loin and tenderloin. They're different muscles on either side of the T. And the difference is that a T-bone comes from further forward in the animal where the tenderloin muscle is narrower. So it has less tenderloin than the Porterhouse, which is further towards the rear of the animal, and it has more tenderloin. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to have these same terms, which you're a barbecue guy. You know a lot about meat. You got close to the answer. How do we think the public is going to understand the difference between Porterhouse and Tbone pork?
Price.
And I reached out to somebody at the pork board, who shall go nameless.
No names, please.
What is the definition? Because there's a legal definition as to how much tenderloin there must be to be called a porterhouse on a steak. Okay. And how much, what the difference is. And so I asked, how much tenderloin must there be on a porterhouse chop? And he didn't know. Yeah. So, I don't know how they're going to define these things yet. But that does sort of sexy things up.
Well, the consumer is going to figure out what the difference is when the porterhouse chop is 50 cents a pound more than the T-bone chop. Yep. Which brings me to my I have two final questions, because we don't need to spend all day on this, but we want to make sure that we're covering it. One, how well is the beef and the pork councils and boards going to promote this? Are they going to make commercials for consumers? Are they going to put it out on Facebook and hopefully it goes word of mouth? Because you show up one day and it's this way, you show up the next day, that's going to lend to its own inherent confusion. So is there going to be any out front promotion on this?
Well, the pork guys have already put out a PDF chart with pictures of the different cuts and the new names. And I have that posted on my site also. And I would assume there'll be one from the beef guys. And more of these will come out. So there'll be charts. I'm sure. It's fodder for all us food bloggers. I got off early. I think I was the first one to break the specifics of this, and I think I'm still the only one that has the complete list of all 318 changes. But I think we'll start seeing more and more of the food bloggers and writers. Hey, this is going to obsolete every cookbook on your shelf. Yeah. Because the book is going to say, go get a pork butt. And you're going to run down to the grocer at 9 in the morning, and the butcher shop, there's no butcher till 10, and you're going to go to the shelf and you're not going to see a pork butt. Correct. You'll see a Boston roast, but you won't know that's a pork butt, and there's no butcher on hand to answer your questions. So, your cookbooks are going to be out of date, which is good for the book industry, which is struggling. I'm working on a cookbook, and I immediately said, holy cow, get back into my manuscript and change all these names. And I'm rapidly, I have a page devoted to the different cuts of pork and another page on my website devoted to different cuts of beef. I have to dive in there this week and fix all that up. So it's going to keep a lot of us busy. I think, by and large, it's going to make label reading a little easier, but by and large, it's also going to attempt to jack up prices. Whether the consumer will accept the higher prices, if there's an excess of inventory, as you alluded, will the inventory still be swallowed up at higher prices? The idea that a ribeye on a steak, on a beef, and a ribeye on a hog are now the same cut, I think is not a bad idea. I think it's a good idea. I think we're going to miss pork butts and a few of the others. Beef shoulder boneless top blade steak is now flat iron. Well, a lot of us have heard of flat iron, but it used to be called beef shoulder boneless top blade steak. So I think that's a little easier. But how does flat iron help us understand what it is? At least not at all. Beef shoulder boneless top blade steak told us what we're getting a cut of meat from the shoulder.
Yes. Now, does this labeling have any propensity to look? We've talked about on the show a number of times snobbery, barbecue snobbery, wine snobbery, all this stuff, and I don't want to. I think for our particular niche, at least. this labeling isn't going to throw anything off for us. It could probably not be labeled, whether it be pork or beef, and we could probably go down the aisle and figure out what it is, touch it here, touch it there, and be able to decipher, oh, well, this is either a Tbone or a Porterhouse, and this is a strip, or this is a center-cut pork chop, whatever you want to do. But for the majority of the lay person that isn't into it like us, does this labeling have potential to confuse them by using synonymous terms that you know for beef now going to pork?
Well, part of the bottom round now is called Merlot steak. You tell me if we're lending ourselves to snobbery.
Cabernet cut.
It used to be called bottom round. Now it's Merlot steak. I mean, I don't know how that helps, because the round we know is the haunches of the animal. And I mean, not everybody knows this, granted. And a lot of people are confused by this. And it does require studying the charts. And, I've got charts on my website, and butcher shops have them. But, just what is a Denver cut? And there's a Des Moines steak now. What if I hate Peyton Manning?
Yeah.
I'm not going to eat no Denver cut.
You're talking.
How come there's no Chicago cut?
You're talking to a guy who lives in Cleveland. Nobody likes Denver out here. You kidding me? John Elway killed us.
It's a little round aperture at the back end. Never mind.
Well, I guess my thought was not necessarily, snobbing it up with these names, but de-snobbing it to a point where you're almost assuming that the American public is dumb, and now we're catering to our dumbedness.
Yeah.
I don't want to be called dumb.
Whole concept of branding. I'm Meathhead.
Oh.
I'm not Craig Goldwyn anymore. I was named Craig Goldwyn at birth, but I'm Meathhead. I have a brand.
Sure.
Everybody has a brand, so they're branding these cuts of meat. I mean, there's even a patented cut of meat, the Las Vegas steak. Mm-hmm. To my knowledge, it's the only patented cut of meat that Dr. Antonio Mata, who works part-time for me, patented this cut of meat that he found a way to extricate from the shoulder. It's a really nice piece of meat, and it's called value added. You dig around in the shoulder, which is a piece that has lots of muscle, sinew, and fat and stuff in there, and you excavate this little tender piece of meat, and you can sell it for a higher price than what it used to sell for as shoulder or chuck. And so it's called value added, and restaurants are now selling the Las Vegas strip steak. And every time they sell one, he gets a piece of the action, I presume.
All right, so let's tie it up in a knot here real quick, put a little ribbon on it. We can go to AmazingRibs.com. You get the full layout of new labels, what the new labels are going to look like, the new cuts, or the diagram with all the new names and pointing to where they're at on the hog.
Some of that stuff.
Some of that. How do you kind of summarize this?
I think the labels will be a little easier to read, and it'll be a little easier to understand once we get used to the new names. But the old charts that we find, that some of us struggled to memorize, and the recipes in our cookbooks and websites are going to be outdated when they call for beef chuck eye, which is a nice piece of meat.
Great.
It's an extension of the ribeye, and it's now the Denver. It's now the Denver roast. So it's going to cause some confusion. A lot of grocery stores still have human beings behind the butcher counter, and hopefully they all figure it out and they can hold our hands and guide us. But if you're shopping at Kmart or the discount stores where there are no butchers on hand,
forget it.
It may be time to get these new charts and start studying.
There you go. Meathhead Goldwyn. You can find them at AmazingRibs.com. You can find them on our traditional Tuesday from 9 to 11 show coming up on the 30th, where we'll be talking about all sorts of cool stuff. Meathead, always appreciate the time. Thanks for coming on and doing this.
Greg, good talking to you. Glad we could squeeze this in. It's an important issue for the public.
Absolutely. There he is, Meathead. And let me do this. Meathead, you hang on there. I'll talk to you here after we go out. This was a live local late breaking story on labeling pork and beef. Again, AmazingRibs.com if you want to check out all the information that Meathead has there. And you'll join me back in 3 days' time, for the regular Barbecue Central show. Again, we're streaming live on Roku. We're streaming live on Roku right now. If you go there, you could have seen this whole interview live right on your flat panel. This will be archived on the YouTubes, also audio side as well. And as I said, we'll see you back Tuesday. We have the crank apron incident of last August. Daniel Pomerantz will be in. And we also have Mike McDearman. And we have the smoking guitar player Fred Bernardo on as well. So we'll look for you Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, this is your program host and proud U.S. American Greg Rempe. Good night now.